Hello and welcome back to my channel. Jacob Payton here, and today we're talking about Kagen the Damned by Jonathan Maberry. This book is super fun, so just be prepared. I will be talking about this for a hot minute because, man, I love this book. I love sword and sorcery, and this is sword and sorcery and spades. It has this really cool cover of a dagger surrounded by roses, which actually has a lot to do with the story, and I will not spoil it for you. But it says, sworn by oath, Kagen Vale is the trusted and feared captain of the palace guard, charged with protecting the royal children of the Silver Empire. But one night, Kagen is drugged and the entire imperial family is killed, leaving the empire in ruins, abandoned by the gods. Haunted and broken, Kagen is abandoned by his gods and damned forever. He becomes a wanderer, trying to take down as many of his enemies as possible, while plotting to assassinate the usurper, the deadly Witch King of Hakia. Meanwhile, all around him, magic, long banished from the world, returns in strange and terrifying ways. Fueled by rage, to exact his vengeance, Kagen must venture into strange lands, battle bizarre and terrifying creatures, and gather allies for a suicide mission into the heart of the Witch King's empire. Kings and gods will fear him. Kagen the Damned. Yeah. This is a straight up sword and sorcery book. And everything that comes along with that. I mean, you have the cosmic horror element. You have a somewhat morally gray character at times who's really only good at drinking, gambling, and killing. I mean, he very much is kind of a Conan the Barbarian like character, but also very much his own thing, right? I mean, he's awesome. He obviously goes through a period where he thinks he is damned by the gods. I mean, that is what the book is about. He believes he's damned and is trying to right the cause of his damnation by killing this Witch King, which came from this kind of conquered kingdom of Hakia and then slaughtered the imperial family that Kagen was supposed to protect, and then he feels like, you know, he has failed in his oath to protect them, so now he can only avenge them. And that's what the story is about. I mean, Jonathan Maberry does not shy away from absolutely horrific levels of violence that you know, happens in war and warfare, and especially what happened in warfare in the medieval times. And he also doesn't shy away from the fact that now that magic's returned, you know, the way people start to behave, because the empire that the Hakians overthrew, the Witch King overthrew, outlawed magic. So now that it's coming back, you know, what kind of horrific things are people going to do to try to attain that power? And that's all in here. And also, I mean, there's a major horror vibe throughout this book. I mean, Jonathan Maberry has written horror books, obviously. I think I've talked about a few of them on the channel, or at least showed them in book hauls, because I do very much enjoy his books. But, I mean, this is also a massive book. Well, not massive, but it's a big book. But the thing I like about it is it very much feels like classic sword and sorcery, because at times, I mean, you know, from here to here is a chapter. So, I mean, you could have a chapter that's like, you know, 5 or 6 paragraphs. You know, he keeps it short. All of his head hopping, I felt, was like poignant. And and some of them do leave on cliffhangers, but it really, I think, made the writing flow in a way that it was fun to read, right? It captured the pulp action and adventure of like a Conan or a Solomon Kane or a Call. I know I'm only talking about Robert E. Howard, and there are other sword and sorcery authors out there, but let's be honest, we all know Robert E. Howard, probably the best. And he's kind of known for those short, almost like, really, I mean, most of the Conan stories are like novella length, if that. Most of them are like novelettes, because they appeared in magazines and stuff. And that's kind of what this feels like as we go through parts of the book, right? I mean, these chapters could have been torn from magazines and then compiled into a book. So we do get that, you know, pulp sword and sorcery feel as we're reading through it, which I think goes a long way to kind of capture the tone of the genre. I am super excited. I mean, Michael Moorcock, right in the front, says rich and original. If you hunger for more George R.R. Martin, this novel will thoroughly satisfy you. I do kind of agree with that. I'm not a huge George R.R. Martin fan. I like a lot of his books, but Game of Thrones is not one of my favorite fantasy book series, which probably shocks a lot of people. I just couldn't get into it. It was a bit too much head hopping for me. And I honestly just couldn't, it was just so many characters, and it was really hard to root for a lot of the characters because so many of them became either morally dubious or downright evil midway through the series. I mean, some of the actions they would take were very different than what is portrayed by some of the characters, and sometimes not at all different by what is portrayed in some of the characters in the HBO series. But I mean, it does kind of feel that way in the way, I guess the Witch King taking over the Silver Kingdom could be kind of seen as someone usurping the Iron Throne because there are a lot of politics and factions at play. I'll be honest, I kind of felt, I don't really know what the best way to describe the Witch King was, but it almost kind of felt like almost like a fascist regime taking over, because while they do allow some things, they do outlaw a lot of others very quickly. And then the first thing they start to do, which I thought was kind of interesting to add in here, was they talk about how they get a historian, and this is a minor spoiler, to start rewriting the Hakian history as well as the Empire's history to make it look like the Hakians were the good guys all along, even though it is stated that both cultures had done a bunch of grievous wrongs to one another. And I kind of thought that was interesting. So there is so much world building in here. And one of the things that I loved too, because a lot of times in fantasy, I feel like we get all of our threads, all our story threads by the end of a book or end of a series, unless like there is another book coming immediately. They're all tied up with a neat bow. That's not done in here. And that's not done really in Sword and Sorcery either, right? I mean, one of the staples of Conan is kind of him finding this weird place that he learned a little bit of the history of, and then it is either destroyed or it is made clear that once he's killed this thing, he's never going to return here. So the mystery of the place, or the mystery of the creature or the demon or whatever, why it's there, is never really solved. And we're given a lot of that in here too, and I think that's really exciting because I do follow Jonathan Maberry on Twitter. I am a huge fan of this book. He has announced there is a second book coming out, and I am 110% thrilled for it. I'm also really excited to see that, this was put out by St. Martin's Press, right? This is St. Martin's Publishing Group. That is a big publisher. I really hope that with the success of this book and, the success of the Witcher series, that we might start, getting more mainstream sword and sorcery books being published. Because we really don't have, if you're a sword and sorcery fan, as far as new sword and sorcery, your options for the most part are tracking down reprints, or trying to find either self-published authors or small presses like DMR Publishing. And, they're not always super easy to find, because a lot of times, self-published authors and independent presses can't really compete with ad dollars of big presses. And a lot of times, let's be honest, a lot of fantasy has a habit of being marketed as sword and sorcery when it is very much not that. Because it obviously is marketed as like high fantasy, and then sword and sorcery gets thrown in there somewhere. But this is just a straight up sword and sorcery. I heard Jonathan Maberry talk about it on a podcast interview, and he's even like, yeah, this is what this book is. So yeah, super excited about this. I can't wait for the second book. If you are a sword and sorcery fan, especially if you're a Conan the Barbarian fan or a Brack the Barbarian, or you just like the down and out kind of brute that's just good at killing to solve most of his problems, like if you enjoy those kind of stories in a somewhat grim, perilous fantasy setting that also has a cosmic horror element like all classic sword and sorcery does, you are going to love Kagen the Damned. The way the chapters are laid out might be jarring at first, and there is a lot thrown at you in the beginning, but if you're a fantasy reader, I think you'll know to push through that. But even if you aren't a big fantasy reader, but you are a classic sword and sorcery reader and you are looking forward or just want to try this book, I mean, you definitely should. I would say, you know, you do get a lot thrown out at you, a lot of backstory with somewhat little action, it feels like at times on the part of Kagen, because you're basically given a lot of history and a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of world building going on. Yeah, even though, like I said, just stick through it, push through those like first 100 pages, deal with the world building. Trust me, you're gonna be thankful for it later, and just enjoy the book. I mean, it's really good. So if you've been on the fence about this book or you're looking for some sword and sorcery action, I mean, 110% I recommend Kagen the Damned. If you have read it and you didn't like it, loved it, whatever, let me know in the comments below. If you know of more sword and sorcery books I should check out, also, I'm always on the hunt for more, so please let me know. And as always, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.